Okay, so where we were as a general like overview, just chazara before we start forward. Um, so we had this idea of the three pillars. The three pillars are three aspects of Tov, which correspond to three relationships: a relationship with the Creator, with other people, and with our own souls, with ourselves. Um, Assuming those are even different things. Which he then, by the time we were finished 2 weeks ago, the Maharal made an argument that these three pillars are the are embodied by the Avos. So Avraham is known for his Chesed. I believe that was 2 weeks ago. Yitzchak was known for the Aggadah, which I pointed out kind of implies the Maharal assumes that Yitzchak was a knowing participant and not, some 5-year-old just dragged off there. I mean, the traditional dating would have him in his 47. So if you're 47, you're kind of willingly there. Um, and Yaakov, because the verses say Titan Emes Yaakov, we discussed whether Yaakov represents truth, represents the struggling with truth, represents how to bring truth out in a world that has so little, given the amount of trickery that his life actually involved. But the pillars of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov come to Gemilas Chasadim, Avoda, and Torah in that order. So kind of like, not quite the same order as the Mishnah. Then last week the Maharal started with a new idea that Rivka and the marriage of Rivka and Yitzchak is also involving these three pillars. The Yitzchak ran to water their servant, who we Chazal say was Eliezer, and water and provide water for all his camels. She ran the way Avram would run to do Chesed, and therefore, what's it called? Sorry, Moshe, that was you. That was you distracting me. So you should be in twice now. So Rivka runs to do Chesed. She really emulates the behavior or imitates the behavior of her father-in-law, future father-in-law of Avraham. Right? She gives water to the person. She gives water to all the camels. She's running to do it the way Avram ran to feed the three people, the three angels who he thought were three people. So Rivka really represents the counterbalance to Yitzchak, where Yitzchak is the avoda still, and Rivka is the chesed. He makes the Maharal points out that the two of them, because the pillars are all aspects of truth, which really emphasizes the idea that we're dealing, as Moshe Yehuda said, I think the first week, three aspects of good, not three different kinds of good. So therefore, each pillar draws the other ones. This is how Yitzchak was drawn to Rivka, and how Yitzchak and Rivka produce a Yaakov. The Maharal points to the jewelry that the servant that Eliezer gave Rivka, which were two bracelets with that weighed 10 gold pieces. Asara zahav mishkalam. So he says this is the Aseret Dibros, which were given one to each of Moshe's hands. They had 5 dibros, which is not what the Yerushalmi says, but it is the general mental image most people have. Each one had 5 dibros on it, and therefore the bracelets represented the dibros. He also gave her a nose ring. Now, karbanos are described as a reach nichoach Lashem, a pleasant odor, whatever that means for Hashem. Onkelos repeatedly says, readily accepted. That's it. That's Onkelos's almost translation of Reich Nichoach. But whatever it is, we see that the carbonos are associated with smell. And therefore, he associates the nose ring with smell and says, Rivka, who embodied chesed, was given presents that represent the other two pillars of Torah and Avodah. So that's where he's going. If you notice, he's getting a lot more mystical now. So therefore he's making a point not that's somewhat different than he made with the three avos. The three avos was more linear, right? You had Avram is chesed, produces Yitzchak and Avodah, and then the two together are capable of producing a Yaakov. Here it's more of a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? You have two parents who combine to produce one child. It's not a line. It's not, generation. It's two in the first generation producing one in the second. The other thing is the Maharal emphasizes that the various aspects of Tov draw to each other. And he's much more emphasizing the unity of these three aspects of Tov, as opposed to, Avram is one and Yitzchak's the other. So this paragraph read significantly differently than what we saw the day before, even though it's still Yitzchak, it's still Yaakov, but by the third person being Rivka instead of Avraham, the model shifts significantly. Then we got to real mysticism, because the Maharal quotes Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah groups the various letters into categories and subtypes. These are the doubled letters, bet and vet, gimel and whatever gimel is supposed to be. We'll say gimel just to make the Teimanim happy. I have a feeling it's something more like Israeli Reish, but whatever it is. Dalid, tough, kaf chaf, pei fei, the double letters. For some reason, Reish is in the Sefer Yetzirah's list, which we don't have a dotted Reish very much, so that's kind of interesting. But in any case, here he talks about the three mother letters, the imahos, which are Aleph, Mem, and Shin. So Aleph, Mem, and Shin in medieval chemistry, or whatever the right term is, was identifies the three letters with three of the four elements. So Aleph is Avir, air. Mem is Mayim. In fact, Mem is named for water. And in Ksav Ivri, in the original, in the hieroglyphics derived script of Ksav Ivri, it's waves. A Mem is waves, because it's Mayim. That's why it's 40 and 40 saw of water and 40 days of the Mabul, and but that's a totally different topic. So there's Aleph, there's Mem, and there's Shin. Shin is for Aish. Oh, you can't have Aleph but stand for both. So Shin is for Aish. I don't have a better explanation than that. So the three mother letters are these three elements, and we don't discuss Aretz, earth, for reasons that are obvious to people in the know. That's all the Maharal gives us. I suggested that this is because earth is inert. And since we're talking about midos that allow us to grow and extend ourselves, we're looking at the other three elements. And earth is only related really to laziness. I mentioned this to Rabbi Yaakov Feldman, who I have the honor of having a chavrusa with on Sundays. And he said, no, that's not really the way earth is viewed in Kabbalah. And he's the man who would know, or he's the man I know who would know. He said, because earth is also anava. As Avram says, Anochi Afa ve'efer, I am dirt and ashes, right? Dust and ashes. So he says earth has connotations of anava, earth. So there, we talk about somebody being grounded. So it's not only in a negative sense. He thought that the reason why we're not discussing Aretz is because Aretz is the most worldly, to the extent that the word Aretz does refer, like we talk about Shemaim v'Aretz. So the element that's furthest from Shemayim is the one that actually is named Aretz. I have problems. I don't think mystically enough for this. To me, there has to be like some logic, and the meaning, synonyms and homonyms just don't play it. So I don't know why. That's the bottom line. I'm not one of the Mevinim that the Maharal talks about. All I know is that he identifies it with these three elements, and the fourth element is often discussed separately by people who discuss the four elements. Somebody raised the question of, but there aren't four elements. And I said, but there are three states of matter and something else that fire is. Whether, something less tangible than matter. So you have four states of matter. The metaphor still works in our worldview, and we don't really have to get caught up in whether they're not their actual elements. But the Maharal points out that avir is avir represents is correlated, not represents, is correlated to the midah of that we need to learn Torah, because it's calm, it's mellow, but it's you can't hold it in your hand. So avir is the element that most comes into play when we're dealing with objective thought, as opposed to aish. Hislavos is the term we use for passionate, fiery passion, is the avoda. We approach avoda with passion more than right. He points out the karbonos are isha karbani lachmi ishai, from as my fires. So the word fire is actually used as a synonym for carbon. So so the element of fire is involved in our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Mayim, the calmness of water and the unity of water, is what we bring when we do Gemilas Chasadim. And therefore, by doing these three kinds of tov, right, we bring the three letters as they exist in Sefer Yetzirah down into the three elements and actually give physical existence to the world. Told you, this one gets very mystical. Now he says, he ends this, Kikol Masha Marnu, who perish a Mishnah. Everything we said is an explanation of the Mishnah. Ke'akol holech el makom echad. They all go to one place. V'shorish echad elav. So to the Maharal, the shoresh, the one root of all the threes we've discussed so far, is these three, the Aleph, the Mem, the Shin, the three elements, and the midos that these elements evoke in us. So that to him is the underlying truth. He also, by the way, along the way, he points out that there's three words. I'm trying to get the pasuk in Tehillim. Let me share the window, share screen. So you see my mouse? El Elokim Hashem Diber Vayikra Aretz. So if you notice, there's three names of God before you get to, and he calls the world. He calls the earth. Kel, the Maharal says, refers to Rachamim. Chesed, because the David HaMelech, Keli, Lama Azavtani. My God, why have you abandoned me? You don't ask Midas Hadin, justice, why have you abandoned me? It's when you need chesed that you feel abandoned. When you need chesed that you're not getting, then you feel abandoned. Avoda, he says, is Elokim, which is Midas Hadin. And because, well, Elokim is Matria Teva, nature, so it refers to the laws of nature, but also we find Elokim is used when God is judging people across Chumash, if not all of Tanakh. So that's the second name, and the third name, the Shem Havaya, is he says it's Torah because this is the name that was first revealed to Moshe. Right, first time Moshe's prophecy at the burning bush, Hashem says, "Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem." So my name, the Tetragrammaton was not known to the forefathers, not the name, because we find they use it in Bereshis. But Hashem didn't act toward them in the way that the Shem Hashem represents. So it was first expressed to Moshe because Moshe was the first one to actually get the Torah and bring it into this world. So these three names are also the three pillars, and they are Vayikra Kela Elokim Hashem Diber V'hu Yikra Aretz. When all three perceptions of God call, then the earth is called speak. Then the earth is called into being. The earth is called into being when there are humans that see God as Midas HaChesed, because that we emulate God's Chesed toward each other. When we use Midas Elokim, the law in how we practice our avoda and obey Hashem's commandments in our relationship to Hashem, and the Shem Havaya when we study His Torah and refine ourselves. And that brings the three midos to physical existence. We're almost at the end of the commentary on this Mishnah. Now that he wrapped it up, you wonder why we aren't actually at the end of the commentary to his Mishnah. So he has one more point to make, but he relates the Mishnah to the previous. He relates Rosh Shimon to the previous Mishnah. So I quoted the previous Mishnah before we proceed. So since this is kind of a change in topic, how did that summary go over? Do you feel ready to go forward? I mean, admittedly, it's very esoteric stuff.
I'm not pretending I followed it all, but I think I see where he's coming back to what he was saying before.
Right. So he's saying there are three letters, and letters are like the original emanation. The three letters correspond to three elements, and the way the letters make the elements happen is through our acting in ways that are similar to what the way we perceive the elements. So the airy, which is cool, but you can't really pick it up, that's going to be Torah, because Torah has to be studied with a certain level of, you need passion to study Torah, but you also need objectivity, right? The karbanos are just straight passion. When it comes to people also, you need passion to relate to people, or else your marriage is kind of lame. But in order to get to chesed, it has to be added with water. There has to be a unity of water. There has to be the calmness of water. The seeking a lowest level kind of water. So he says that is sort of where that was the focus of the esoteric part. Right, we bring the letters to the elements by acting in ways that are similar to the elements, and that is the metaphysical path for the emanation to make the world actually happen. Everything he said until now, where he spoke about by emulating Hashem, you make Right? Hashem is the only thing of value, or the only thing that's not contingent. So if if you connect to Hashem, then you give value to the world. If you do chesed, then Hashem will do chesed. All those things are details in this esoteric idea that he's coming up in. Like, how does emulating, how do you get from the letters, the very, very abstract letters, to physical realities? Well, that's everything we've seen until now. So the Mishnah introduces the previous Mishnah, the one we spent all this time on, introduces Shimon HaTzadik as a survivor of Anshe Knesset Aggadah. So the Maharal sees this, as we're about to see, as a pointer to tell us that two Mishnayos are connected. The previous Mishnah, not the first part. First part is Moshe Kibul Tir Misinai. The first part just justifies the existence of Masechtas Avos. So Torah, the Mishnayos altogether, the whole Torah Shabbal Peh. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Maharal Yeshua gave it, handed it over to Yeshua. Yeshua is Chaim. Yeshua gave it to the elders. It's Chaim Neviim. The elders gave it to the prophets, the Neviim Asrua, Anshe Knesset Aggadah. The Neviim gave it to the men of the Great Assembly. So that was 1,500 years we just jumped through, but that gets us to Anshe Knesset Aggadah, who are the first people the Mishnah quotes. So Anshe Knesset Aggadah is like Ezra, Nehemiah, Mordechai, maybe. Depends how much of Mordechai's time he spent in Israel, which Chazal debate. But that's the period of time about the start of the second, during the Galus of Bavel and the start of the second Beis Hamikdash. So Shimon HaTzadik was one of the last of the Anshe Knesset Aggadah, and then the next Mishnah, the Mishnah goes through his students and his students to their students, and so on. That's the first parak. So Haim Amru Shlosh Devar Anshe Knesset Aggadah would say three things. Having Mesunim Badin, be patient. I don't know if I would have said Mesunim is patient, but okay. In justice, I would have said meticulous, but take your time either way. So I thought take your time is more a meticulousness thing than a patience thing, but whoever it is that Sfaria gave me the translation to disagreed. V'midu talmidim harbe, and establish many students, vasu siyog l'Torah, and put a fence around the Torah. Right, and that gives us the background that I need in order to finish the commentary on the second Mishnah. Yesh l'das, you have to know. Kidivri Shimon HaTzadik, the words of Shimon HaTzadik, Shu Mishiyare Knesset Aggadah, who is one of the survivors of Anshe Knesset Aggadah. Haim Mikusharim, these words are tied in Divrei Anshe Knesset Aggadah, with the words of Anshe Knesset Aggadah, which is not surprising because they said three things. Ki Haim Ba'u L'Sakein HaTorah V'Mishpatim V'Mitzvos. They came to fix or to establish the Torah, the mishpat. Mishpat is what? Laws of justice and mitzvos. Shem shayachim l'Torah shalot tipol. They belong to the Torah, that the Torah should not fall. Kamosha kasavnu lamala. Like he said on the Mishnah that we skipped. That's the topic of his commentary to the first Mishnah. Shimon HaTzadik bolis hakein ha'olam shelo yimot. And Shimon HaTzadik came to fix or establish the world that it should not fall. Yimot is not the same word as tipol, but I'm not really clear on why the Maharal switched words. Maybe because there's nothing for the world to fall to. I don't know. Kamo Amar, like he says, Al Shlosha Devarim Haolamim Omeid. The world stands on three things. But Torah he lemala min madregas haolam. The Torah is loftier than the level that the world is on. V'achar haolam. Right? The ideal is always loftier than the real. Right? So the Torah is loftier than the world. The kasher tavin b'divrei Shimon HaTzadik. And when you understand in the words of Shimon HaTzadik, Teda v'tavin ki elu dvarim she'amar hein me'ein divrei in Anshe Knesset Gedolah. They are similar to the words of Anshe Knesset Gedolah. They're in the same image. Ki hu haya gam kein misharei Knesset Gedolah. After all, he was one of their survivors. Ki Anshe Knesset Gedolah amru gimel dvarim. What were the three things Anshe Knesset Gedolah said? Have a musunim adin. Take your time enacting justice. Ve'amidu talmidim harbe, and establish many students. Basu siyag Torah, and make a fence around the Torah. This is the norm of rabbinic laws that protect the Torah. Gezeros, which, by the way, are not all the rabbinic laws, but that again is a totally different topic. There are rabbinic laws like Hanukkah, which are not fences around the Torah. They're not gezeros. Right, Purim. In fact, Shehiyah and Chazara, which is leaving a pot on the fire on Shabbos and returning the pot to Shabbos, one is a gezerah and one is not, at least according to the briskers. So whatever. When they say gezerah, they don't mean the rabbis should make laws. It's in particular laws that protect the observance. Also included in Siyag Torah is minhagim that prevent Torah violation. Also personal practices that prevent Torah violation. So, for example, if somebody has a certain craving and they avoid going past the bakery whose kashrus is not up to their usual standards, that would be making a siyag Torah. Shimon HaTzadik Amar Keneged Mashamru. Okay, Shimon HaTzadik Amar. Shimon HaTzadik said, Keneged Mashamru Anshe Knesset Gedolah. Corresponding to what the Anshe Knesset Gedolah said, have a musunim badin. Take your time in justice. Keneged Ze Amar Va'al Havoda. Why? Ki avoda v'adim shayachim zelazeh. Avoda and din and justice are similar one to another, which is less surprising when you remember that he just established that the name Elokim, it corresponds to how we perceive God through avoda, because justice corresponds to avoda. When you do a carbon, right? Well, not when you do a carbon. When Nadav and Avihu do a carbon, right? And they go with the passion and the feelings and not the law, right? It doesn't go very well, right? With halacha, you have to be very exact in the din. With beinan l'makam, you have to go very exact in the din. When beinan l'chavero, you often want to go. There are often factors that make the din less applicable.
The
Right?
din over here is talking about judgment. It's not talking about like conditions. It's talking about judging between one man and another man.
Right, as opposed to mishpat.
Right. So
I'm thinking of rules.
Aggadah?
I'm thinking of rules. Din is rules, because mishpat is making accommodation. You will see that the correspondences he makes are relatively loose, so you may be overly concerned.
I'll hold the thought.
Okay, but you'll see the three correspondences, and you'll see how tight we should be demanding that.
Yeah, I see the next couple of words that he's about to say.
Amram Melamed Shetasim Sanhedrin Eitzel Mizbeach. And this is what Chazal say, that it teaches that the Sanhedrin should be put next to Mizbeach. So in the wall of the second base of Mikdash, which was thick enough to have rooms, there was a room, the Lishkas HaGazis, the right where the part of that tower held the wood that would go on the Mizbeach, because it was the tower nearest the Mizbeach. And part of that room was where the Sanhedrin met. So they put the Sanhedrin in the room, in the wall around Harabayas that was nearest the Mizbeach. The Zachar Torah Keneged Hemidu Talmidim Harbe. And Shimon HaTzadik remembers or mentions Torah to correspond to establishing lots of students. The Zecher Gemilas Chasad, so that one's straightforward. He doesn't belabor it, and I don't think we have to. Right? I mean, you're students, Torah, right? The Zecher Gemilas Chasadim, and the remembrance of Chesed, Keneged Vasu Siyag. Right, the making a fence around the Torah, that's Gemilas Chasadim. How? Ki Asiyag, because the fence, Masha Mekabel of Lasos, Afki Ein Mechuyev Bedin, even though he's not obligated in law. Right, so that's why I was thinking more in terms of mishpat and making peace between the parties is like a siyag, not like the law itself. So he's kind of not really saying that avoda is din. He says they're shayach. Avoda shayach to din. Avoda has to be done by the rules exactly. The same way din is judging people by the rules exactly. Chesed is usually going beyond the law. It reminds me of something my mother once theorized. My mother is of the opinion that the reason why the laws of Lashon Hara were not treated in detail until the Chavetz Chaim is for this reason. So the laws of Lashon Hara are like two seifim in the Shulchan Aruch, in under a siman discussing the laws of injury. So Shulchan Aruch codifies Lashon Hara as verbal injury. And it's two seifim and there's very little detail. Till you get to the Chavetz Chaim in the 20th century. So my mother is of the opinion that until Jewish culture collapsed to the point that we needed these things written out in detail, nobody thought to write a code for them. Then you get to a place where you wouldn't talk like that in front of your mother, wasn't sufficient guidelines. So you needed the Chavetz Chaim to codify things like, well, you can speak Lashon Hara when there's a purpose. And what is a sufficient purpose? And when could you speak? When could you hear Lashon Hara, listen to Lashon Hara? How much can you accept of Lashon Hara? All these laws only became relevant because people were no longer, well, let's not say that people historically were perfect on Lashon Hara, because the Gemara says people weren't. Ariel's back. But people at least knew well before they crossed the law that they were crossing propriety until the Chavetz Chaim stayed. That's my mother's theory.
Pretty good theory.
But the theory plays on this very idea that siyag is tied to Gemilas Chesed, that when you deal with Chesed, you don't look to walk exactly to the line between you and the next person. Right? You step back. When you deal properly with other people, you don't go exactly as far as the law allows. You give them the room they need. That's called a mavir al midosav. Whoever forgives his rights is really a kind of loose definition, right? Crosses his limits.
Overlooks.
Yeah. Well, mavir is, well, I mean, he means crosses
He lets it pass by, means he overlooks it.
Yeah. But he does have art in his right.
A small parenthesis here. Just this reminds me of something I heard from David Beshevkin. He has another very good podcasts, and in one of them he discusses how there are people who, let's say, take halacha as a first language and as a second language, like nowadays.
Moshe Koppel.
Yeah,
that was his interview of Moshe Koppel.
Sure.
Dr. Koppel and I are in correspondence. I mean, when he was in New Jersey. That's the only time I ever met him. He actually brought me a stack of every article he ever wrote at that point. So yeah, so the first language, second language thing is something I know well. He's a mathematician whose specialty is identifying texts statistically. So he found that while you can divide the Torah along the lines, lines similar to those of biblical critics, the Torah shows more unity than the plays versus the sonnets of Shakespeare. And a lot of what you may think are the lines are the differences between the word usage in different topics. So if you discuss, like Vayikra is going to be written in a different language than Bereshis. That doesn't mean different authors. I mean, that was just his, but he actually does it statistically, and he knew I would understand the statistics. I mean, that's my background is engineering. So yeah, so we struck up a friendship, but we only met once.
Wasn't he a little involved in Torah codes? I'm Googling him now.
He was against Torah codes.
He was against Torah codes. I seem to remember his name about that.
Yeah, no, he's a statistician, so he knows the kinds of things that people think are in statistics, are often counterintuitive. Like the famous, I don't know how famous it is outside of people who like math, but the Monty Hall problem, where people are amazed that the odds are what they are, but so you often get people's intuitions and the actual math don't mesh. And he intuited that this was one of those cases and spent some time proving the point. But in any case, so Moshe Koppel understands halacha as being more like a language than a legal system. And what happens is, as you lose the native speaker's knowledge of the language, you need more rules. So somebody who is learning English as a second language knows what the past pluperfect is. I only remember that one time I learned those words, but I have an innate sense of what sounds right. And he says that this is what repeatedly happened over the generations. Moshe died. So 3,000 or 30,000 laws were lost. Asniel ben Knaz reestablished them. He said, yes, Asniel ben Knaz sat there with drushos and analyzed the Torah and formally reproduced the information that the culture had in an informal way before Moshe died. Or similarly, before and after Bavel, the Anshe Knesset Gedola established it. The final forms of the letters were forgotten, and Anshe Knesset Gedola reestablished them. Or this was forgotten, and Anshe Knesset Gedola. Why? Because the exile was traumatic. We lost some of the culture, and some of that intuitive sense of what was right got replaced with formal legal rules. And he says it's a repeated process, and that's why. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's the whole birth of the Tanaim and the Tanaic process and the shift from Nevi'im. Like when we had enough innate sense of what sounded right, it was possible to become a Navi. When you leave that level of Torah culture, Torah as a first language, Then you start having to write grammar books. And that's when you start getting the Tanaim and the analysis of halacha in a more formal way, and not the looser, whatever. That's his theory. I mean, I find it fascinating, and it's definitely something we saw in the 1940s and 50s through, most of my lifetime. Right, a lot of things that that's what Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik wrote about. Right, my grandfather would have never asked how big excise is.
Right. I think that's what Elizabeth might be talking about in the chat.
Oh,
Elizabeth,
I'm sorry, I can't watch everything.
That's why I called it out.
Yeah.
Well,
Am I
that's it.
interpreting correctly?
I'll just briefly mention that regarding the loss of the final forms of letters that happened
Yeah.
again in the 20th century with Soviet Yiddish. They tried to ban. They stopped printing them, and this was part of the whole project of de-Judicizing, stopping making Yiddish Jewish.
It's such a funny thing to pick on, but I noticed that in the title of Shari Yosher, like where Shimon Shkup, they always write Shkup with a non-final pay. And I had thought it was because transliteration, like it was to mark it as a transliteration as opposed to a word. But now I'm starting to think maybe before the Soviet edition, the title page had a final pay. I don't know.
Well, probably because his name was pronounced with a P instead of an F, and there's no final.
Oh, that's right. There's no final pay.
There's no final P.
Yeah. But another thing you find in the 19th century, when Seifim are numbered, Chaf is a final Chaf, and Nun is a final Nun. Nowadays, when we number, they're the medial forms. It would be weird to see a final Chaf as a 20.
In some gematria schemes, final chaf is, I think, 500.
500, yeah.
Yeah, and then they go on from there.
Okay.
Can I just add one point to both what you're saying and what Elizabeth's saying? I think that you have the openings of machlekes makes a machlekes for the same reasons, because when you have to go back and try to figure out what it is the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, and you're going back to textual principles and stuff like that, suddenly you find, like you find in Gemara all over the place, you can learn the same sukkim and do everything in one way or everything in another way, and you end up with two different conclusions.
Right. Also, when things are informal, you have room. The two different conclusions could blur into each other.
Right.
Right. When you're dealing with what sounds right, so it doesn't really get into a contradiction if this sounds right or that sounds right, or in a third case something in between sounds more right. It's not. It's because you're formalizing that two different positions even become a machlokas. It's like what kind of fill-in did people wear during in the days of Bayesheni? Rashi or Rabbeinu Tam? How did they tie their tzitzis? Did they tie it like?
I seem to remember Rabbi Reuven Margolis has a book called, I think, Shalos Teshuvos Min HaShamayim, I think. He doesn't, it's not his book, it's Rishon, but he does the commentary and footnotes and introduction. If I remember correctly, and I could be totally misremembering, putting two things together, but he discusses finding archaeological evidence of tefillin and which order they were in, and found some with the Rabbeinu Tam way, so not the way most people wear it today. And then he says, well, it was found in the Geniza, and maybe it was put away because it was the wrong one, and that's why it survived. So you can go both ways.
Right. Well, no, I mean, one of the factors of the machlokas is that in the location that was in the days of Gaon and believed to be Yechezkel's tomb, they found both.
Maybe that's what I was talking about. Even I don't remember.
No, there is the Karagniza. There's also things that they found among the Hasmoneans in the tunnels. Although it turns out that Yigal Yadin misreported what he found, so I can't discuss that because I don't know what was truth and what was
Problematic.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to our text. So this is where he gets to. So he's not really saying that din is avoda. He's saying that din and avoda are correlated because they both require paying attention to the line of the law, right? The exactness. Whereas Gemilas Chasadim require and Siyag are both about stepping away from the line and being more generous than exactness. So I don't really, what I mean? So that's why I said I think he's being looser than you were trying for, Moshe.
I see that. I see what you're saying.
Right. But and again, he's really looking at these things in terms of midos. Like, I think I scrolled too far of it.
You have to the second line.
The kacham rinan, but this is what it says in brachos. Amru malachei sharis lifnei kadosh baruch hu. The serving angel said before Hashem, Ksibis harascha. It says in your Torah, Asher lo yisaponim, v'lo yikach shochad. Right, it will not favor one face, will not lift one face, and will not accept bribes. Great praise to God. God judges without accepting bribes. Valoata no saint panim li Israel. Hold on, angels say. You do show favoritism to Israel. Shenemar Yisa Hashem panav elecha. It's the bracha from the Kohanim. We ask Hashem to, right? Hashem told the Kohanim to ask Hashem to show favoritism to us. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So now Hashem answers the angels. Ki lo esa lahem panim. V'chi lo esa lahem panim. Should I not show for them favoritism? Ani kasavti b'sorasi. I wrote in my Torah. V'chalta v'savato v'rachta. You will eat, you will be satisfied, and you will bless. The Haimedaktigim, and they are careful on themselves. Ad kazayis, ad kabetza. If they eat only an olive worth or only an egg worth, right? That's enough that we would make a bracha after our food. Whereas daraisa benching is only after you had enough to be full after a meal. Kolomar. So as to say, well, what does this exchange mean to us? Shehim nichnasim lifnim min adin. Shehim nichnasim lifnim min adin. That this is from God's perspective, that they, the Jews, enter within the limits of the law. Kacha kanesi mahem lifnim min adin. So too, I will be within the limits of the law with Bnei Israel. So what ends up being is that it's interesting. His way of referring to fate, what he's saying is Hashem doesn't go beyond the limits of the law when it comes to judging the Jews, because it is within the limits of the law to go beyond the limits when the other side is going beyond the limits. It is perfectly just to go beyond what they deserve if you're rewarding them for going beyond what is required of them. There's a level and a meta level going on here. On the ground floor level, Hashem is Yisa Hashem panav elecha. Hashem is showing favoritism. On the meta level, everything is even because it's reciprocating our going beyond what's demanded of us. So Hashem gives us what more than is fair on a naive sense of the word fair, because we are going beyond what's demanded of us, and therefore it ends up being fair. It's a kind of, right? He's explaining how Yisafanim is showing favoritism, as it's phrased in the bracha, is not Yisafanim as phrased as the words of the Torah are put in the angels' mouths. Asher lo Yisafanim, but Yisashem panav elecha. In one sense, he shows us favoritism. In another sense, it's not favoritism. It is a fair repayment of our going beyond. Right? Hashem is going beyond because we go beyond. And in another sense, he's not going beyond because that's reciprocal.
Yep.
Kolomar shehim nichnasim lefnim min adin. So as to say, though I just read that, they, the Jews, go within the limit, the exact limits of the law. Canaan kanas imahem lefnim mishir sadin. So too, they, I will go with them within the limits of the law. Interesting metaphor thing I want to note. In English, we talk about going beyond the law, and in rabbinic idiom, you go within the law. Doing more than the law requires is lifnim mishir sadin. It's within the limits of the law. It's not going beyond the law. I like what Elizabeth wrote. Earned favoritism by expecting reciprocity in chesed echoes something that the Maharal said about how chesed earns the world's existence. That by us doing chesed in the world, Hashem does chesed to us and to the world, reciprocity. Reciprocally. I don't know my English well enough. What can I tell you? The Hamid, yeah. A person, it ought to make a fence around the Torah, even though he's not obligated legally. It's explained above. Include in their musar, hadavar shehudin, something which is law. Kamoshamru having musunim bedin. Hadavar shu hefech Vehu asusi aglatora. So here you have a thesis and an antithesis. When he says hefech, he actually uses the word anti. Having musinim bedin means meticulous or take your time doing the law, and asusi aglatora. Don't be exact in the law. Va'adavar hu shehu kamo emtza'is, and what's the synthesis? What's the middle? V'zeh hamidu talmidim harbe l'Torah, kamo shekasavnu l'mala. So he's saying that the Torah study and the Torah teaching of establishing students is the synthesis of din and chesed. And this is all to fix a person in their entirety. Both in the exactness of the law and in the opposite of the law. And in the middle. And that's a general pattern throughout this Masechta. Including our Mishnah, Shimon HaTzadik. When you understand the explanation which we gave above. Those things which Shimon HaTzadik remembered or mentioned, they correspond to the three letters and the three elements. Water and fire are the incompatible opposites. And And air is synthesis, is a middle form. And this, well, this is very, very mystical, esoteric stuff. And so too for the explanation which we gave. They give chok, which is meta-rational laws that we can't understand, laws whose logic is beyond a human. Mishpatim, these are fairness laws, umitzvos and commandments. V'havein zema'od, understand this very well. Ki hu amitas ha'perish shalan shiknes gdol shema tzadik vein la'arich yoser. And there's nothing more to be said. So when I talked in the second or third class of Fred Flintstone and the angel and the devil and the head in the middle being three heads, this was the paragraph that had reminded me of my childhood television days. Yeah, I meant to delete this next paragraph. There were a couple of things in the sheet that, I treated the next Mishnah. I decided that if I do the Maharal on the next Mishnah, we'll do it after the Gra, which is the next worksheet. This was the Mishnah that they discussed. Notice, though, since I didn't delete it, that the Maharal would be implying that Kina, Tava, and Kavod are thesis and antithesis and the middle. And I don't mean synthesis, because sometimes the Maharal's middle is a synthesis, and sometimes the Maharal middle is just an unresolved dialectic. Like, just sometimes there is no combining the two, and life is messy, and you just have to deal with the conflict. So the middle is a broader term than saying synthesis. But somehow or another, the Maharal would find it in this Mishnah. But again, the Maharal on this Mishnah, I think, would make more sense after we do the Gra, and it may even be redundant. I have to kind of see where the Gra goes, whether or not I'm going to leave that in our curriculum. So we graduated. We should make a seam on the Maharal after 5 weeks.
I have to say that I don't think I ever learned the whole Maharal on a Mishnah, and I think that's pretty interesting stuff. So thank you.
It is. I mean, obviously I thought this one was interesting. So anything else would
I learned Maharal in other contexts, on Chumash and on Gurari and Rashi, things like that. But I don't know if I ever really spent time with him on Abbas. I really don't think so. I did. So it was nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So which after the Gra? So you want to go to the Gra after this?
Yeah, I even opened it up on the shared screen. So the Gra that we're going to look at is from a very hard to obtain pamphlet, contrast called Peirish al Kama Aggados, an explanation of a few Aggados. And this is the 14th Aggadah that he explains. Growing up, not growing up, but once I was at a yeshiva, the only copy I owned was the appendix to a book called The Juggler and the King, where Rabbi Aaron Feldman expounds on these Aggados. So in the appendix, he has a scan of the has a scan of the Königsberg edition. I ended up finding a much clearer edition on Otzar Sfarim. It's not on Sfaria, so we got page images for it, not scan text. But before we look at the Gra's commentary on the Aggados, assuming we get there today, let's look at the Aggadah itself. So the Gemara, this is in Bechoros, not to be confused with Brachos, Bechoros, Chesem Abeis. So there's a series of stories where Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania goes to Athens. and he gets into debates with the elders of Athens. In fact, the elders of Athens show up in other stories also. I don't know if he actually meant that there's a group of philosophers in Athens that they what's it called, or if it's a Talmudic idiom for philosophers. But he does go to Greece. I mean, that part of the story that that we missed, it involves a ship ride. So he is going to Greece. Whether he's going to Athens and meeting elders, or he went to Greece and encountered Greek philosophy, I'm not really as clear exactly how literal that goes. But in any case, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania meets Greek philosophy in this series of stories, and they challenge him. So there's some kind of competition they set up to see who could outsmart the other. I mean, I guess, a bunch of bright people get together, slightly different worldviews. The first thing you're going to do is entertain each other with puzzles, with thought puzzles. So this is where they go. The sages of Athens demand Benilon Besa Ba'avira Dalma, build us a house in the air of the world. So, this is easy in Star Trek. Just, get a couple of levitation beams, anti-gravity going, build yourself a house in the air of the world. So Omar Shem, so Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania says one of the God's, names, Kam Vesala ben Shmaya La'ara. And he gets up and he is hanging somewhere between heaven and earth. Amar Lahu. So he says to them, Asiku li livni vitina. I want you to pass me the bricks and the mortar so that I could build a building. That is in our Gemara where this paragraph ends. The Bach, who wrote, that's Rav Yoel Circus, who wrote best known for a commentary on the side of the Shulchan Aruch. It's one of the standard page, right? Achronim, who further developed the halacha. He has a critical edition of the Gemara. And in his critical edition, there's another 2 lines, which the Gra includes in his analysis. Also in Ein Yaakov, which is a collection of Aggadah, it's a Gemara minus the halacha. In some editions, these lines appear. In some editions, they don't. So anyway, where were we before that little intro to the brackets? So that was explaining just that one bracket character. So Amar Lahu Asikuli Livne Vitina. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, before my little detour, says, bring me the bricks and the mortar and I'll build you the house up here. So they respond to him, Umi Ika Dematzi Lasuki Hasam. Hold on, you think we could find somebody who could bring the bricks and the mortar up there? Amar, so he said to them, Umi Ika Dematzi Lemivni Besa ben Shmai Lara. Well, you thought, come on. You think you can find somebody who could build a house between heaven and earth? Meaning, what did he do? He got the impossibility from their mouth to his mouth. Right? They're demanding he do something impossible, and he narrows it down and to getting the physical objects up there floating in the air so he could do the building. So obviously there's a lot more going on than the literal story. Regardless of how literal these elders of Athens are. Oh, the whole reason why, by the way, why I question the literalness of the elders of Athens is Athens as the seed of philosophy is hundreds of years before Yeshua ben Hanania. I mean, how many centuries was Aristotle dead before Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania was born?
You tell us.
let's put it this way. Socrates and Daniel were the same generation.
Okay.
Okay.
Much
Socrates taught Plato. Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle taught Alexander. Alexander meets Shimon HaTzadik, who we just met in depth, right? And now we're after the second Beis Hamikdash. We're in the period of the Yoshua ben Hananiah, I believe, is a Tana, right? So now we're in.
There's some
right?
discussion about that.
Yeah. Well,
You
maybe
can discuss something.
So he's so you're going from the time of the Babylonian exile to the time of the Mishnah, or maybe after, depending upon what Moshe Yehuda's Google shows up. Or maybe nobody knows. I had assumed that these stories were a Tana primarily because the metaphoric stories are usually set in the past. A story that's a mashal is not said about contemporaries.
Okay, so according to Wikipedia, Hebrew Wikipedia, he was a second generation Tana.
That's what I thought.
A student of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. That means right after the second Beis Hamikdash, like a generation after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash.
Right, or maybe a survivor when he was a child.
Oh, this was the Rabbi Yeshua who argued with Rabbi Gamliel. Makes sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's a generation after.
Yeah.
Rabbi Gamliel takes over when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? No, actually, there's somebody who is the Nasi during Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but he's in hiding almost his entire Nasius because they're trying to kill out the presidency. The Romans tried exterminating the presidency. So the Nasi in Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's day was spend almost his entire reign in hiding. So you don't hear about him. But anyway, let's get back to the second Gemara, so that next week we can start with just a quick review of the Gemara and get to the commentary. And it's a great week to invite your friends because we'll start a new topic next week. Leola, so this is a second Gemara that the Gra quotes pretty early in his commentary to the to explain that Aggadah.
It was Rabbi Shua ben Levi that I just saw this about, that there's some controversy about that. Rabbi Shua ben Levi.
Okay, so, different person.
Different person. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. It's fine. Leolam kasavar shalosh mishmaros have a lila. So there was a debate about the time of Kriyat Shema. So it says time of Kriyat Shema is the first watch of the night, and there's a dispute whether the night was divided into 3 watches or 4. This is guarding the Beis Hamikdash was divided into watches, and there were either 3 or 4 watches. The honor guard had, I don't think they were really maybe they were actual guards, but I'm aware of the sense they were an honor guard. So at this point, the Gemara says, no, really, he said, really, there were 3 mishmaros at night. So when it says the first mishmar, it's the first third of the night. We don't hold like this anyway, because we hold it's the entire night, but try to get it done before midnight so that you don't mess up. One second. I got 2 people in the waiting room that I'm trying to get to join. Okay. John finally joined us. Hey, John, welcome back. So there are 3 mishmaros in the night. We call Kamash Malon, and this comes to include the Ika Mishmaros Barakia, that there are 3 mishmaros among the angels in heaven, Vika Mishmaros Ba'ara, and there are watches here on earth as well. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Shalosh Mishmaros have a halayla, there are 3 mishmaros at night. I'll call Mishmar Yoshev HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Shoeg Ka'ari. And at each Mishmar, Hashem sits on his throne and roars like a lion. Shenemar Hashem imamrom yisag, yishag, Hashem will roar from on high. Umimaon kadsho yitain kolo, and from his holy palace, he will throne room own. I guess throne room is pardon.
His dwelling.
Yeah, that's why I first said palace, but I'm pretty sure for some reason I had concluded it was I'm looking to see what he is. So whoever translated Rabbi Steinsaltz also said dwelling. But I think whatever. I don't think there's a million words for whatever. I think it's a reference to the throne room and not to the house, but I could be wrong. Yitain kolo, he gives voice. Sha'og yishag al navehu. So he roars over the destruction, over his pain. So God didn't.
Navehu is also his dwelling. That's the base of Migdash.
Okay, so Navehu. Okay, I got it. So there's a symmetry if you take Ma'on as a building.
Mm-hmm.
Right. In his non-physical building on high, he roars over the loss of his physical building down below. Right? That's the Siman Ladavar. Mishmara Rishona Chamor Noar. During the first watch, the donkey brays. Apparently, donkeys are party animals and they go to sleep late. Shania Kalavim Tzoakim. In the second watch, the dogs bark. And there's a Chanukah, there's a Pesach tie-in to this, because we reward the. It says by the law of Trephos that you throw the meat that wasn't shechted properly to the dogs. The Gemara says there's a reward for them not barking the night of
Yitzias Mitzrayim.
Right, but I wasn't going with Yitzias Mitzrayim. I was looking for the 10th Makas Bechoros, but it's the same thing. It's the same night. Makas Bechoros happened at midnight, so the dogs would naturally be barking because it's the middle third of the night. So the fact that things were silent was notable. That's the Pesach connection. It's the best I could do this close to Pesach. Maybe, yeah.
I always thought of being the kind that when I fed my dog, may she rest in peace.
There's also a story in the Gemara, by the way, that Shmuel had a piece of meat and he just learned the halacha and realized that the meat wasn't kosher, so he gave it to the dog that was under the table, which to me implied that Shmuel, the Amora, not the prophet, owned a pet dog, because you don't keep watchdogs under the table. But okay.
Dov Zakkai mentioned that he just wrote a book about Rebbe and Antoninus, and he may be working on a book on Shmuel in the future.
Okay, Shlishis in the third watch.
Still not getting a dog, Micha.
Pardon?
Still not getting a dog.
That's perfectly fine. Tino Gionek Mishadei Imo, a baby nurses from the mother's breast. Visha Mesaperes and Bala, and a woman talks to her husband. So that's the third watch. Obviously, the Gra is going to tell us the donkey's not about the donkey, the dogs are not about the dogs, the baby's not about the baby, and the couple talking in the early dawn is not the couple talking in the early dawn. So these are three different parts of the night, somehow or another have to do with heaven, earth, and the air in between them. And that is a teaser, because I will not start with 9 minutes left. With 8 minutes left, I'm not starting the Gra's commentary. But I was serious, though, that it would be a good time to invite people, because we're starting a new text. So, yeah, they'll be less lost. I mean, you notice I'm still on topic of 3, so I can't really say that there won't be mentions of the Maharal, but it'll be less lost. The Gra's focus, by the way, as a Vorspeis is on aspects of the soul, which I'm going to try to draw connections between the three aspects of the soul, the three relationships, the three aspects of Tov, and the three crowns in the Beis HaMikdash, where we began. That's the point of the threeness. This is the last three texts. If we include the potential of returning to that other Mishnah of the Maharal, then there'll be a half a text, a little sampling afterwards. But this is the last text. After that, we leave threes. We stay on relationships though, because as anybody who's seen my book knows, to me, relationships are the beginning and end of how to get meaning in life.
Well, for it.
Okay. Which is, yeah. So I'm going to, unless somebody has a question that they need to be on record, I'm going to hit the, well, first I'm hitting the stop share, and I'll hit the stop recording unless you really think that there's a question that somebody out there in Zoom land would want to know. We do have a number of people who are following the shiurim, I know from questions, who've only been with us live once or twice. Sometimes it's a time zone issue. Sometimes it's, in two cases, it's the person lacks the, needs to be able to hit pause and think, lacks the educational background to keep up with
Since
the
we're
pace.
still recording, let's just say hi to all those people.
Yeah. So there is value to saying something just for the recording, was my point of that detour there. So if you have a question that you want on the recording for those people to pick up on, you think the answer would help them, do so. Otherwise, I'm hitting the stop.
I want to just point out, that you can record or not, is that there's, even though this is like so very, very metaphysical, there's a lot of, I mean, not a lot, but there's some significant practical applications to this. There's the concepts that he has over here, the things that the world is standing on, and then to what we learned tonight with help me here with those the meaning behind and the connection behind the three things from the first Mishnah, the things like that. These are like life lessons. They're very abstract in the way the Maharal discusses them, and or they could be abstract, but they're not really abstract. He means them very practically.
Yes, he gets all metaphysical with Aleph, Mem, and Shin. But in the meantime, he tells you that that means you have to develop a sense of when to use passion, when to use calm, and when to use abstract reasoning, and how you relate to each object. So his entire metaphysics is a very pragmatic metaphysics.
Right.
Because his metaphysics is grounded in midos and behavior. Like, what connects alphabet to elements is midos and behavior.
Huh? I missed that. Alphabets to elements?
What he uses to connect, the Aleph, Mem, and Shin.
The Aleph, Mem, Shin. Okay.
Right, which is the first emanation, right? The Sefer Yetzirah, the 22 letters, the 10 digits are the first emanation. Right? That's the most abstract. What gets that down to tangibles is human behavior. Right. It's what brings meaning into it's what makes the contingent existence borrow non-contingency from God, right? We exist in the real and not in the hypothetical because we're emulating Hashem.
Right.
Shin, Emesh, Kol Pachtai Hayal Hachi Rachok.
No, it wasn't about yesterday.
No.
Okay.
Micha, it always seems to happen that I know I missed last time, but it seems to happen that the conversation, there are people who are waiting for you to turn the recording off for some reason.
Okay.